Picture this, a single spark of liberty, struck in a damp English meadow way back in the year 1215. It's a spark that would eventually cross oceans, ignite a monumental revolution, and fundamentally reshape the globe. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going on a cinematic journey through time to explore how a series of revolutionary documents completely dismantled absolute power and laid the groundwork for the democratic societies we live in today. Let's jump right in.
Here is our roadmap for the journey. We'll be tracing an epic timeline covering the roots of democratic thought, the spark of revolution, the turning points of war, framing the new republic, and finally, a global democratic legacy.
All right, let's kick things off with Part 1, Roots of Democratic Thought. We're going from feudal abuse right into the Enlightenment.
Before we had republics and constitutions, we were dealing with the heavy hand of feudalism. Back in 1215, King John was heavily taxing the people and losing territories in France. So a group of rebellious English barons essentially backed him into a corner at Runnymede. They forced him to agree to a 63-clause document known as the Magna Carta. Fun fact here, King John actually couldn't write, so he didn't sign it, he sealed it with wax. But it introduced a totally radical idea for the time. Even a king has to obey established law. Fast forward to 1688, the Glorious Revolution removes King James II, and by 1689, we get the English Bill of Rights. This was massive because it confirmed William and Mary's succession and guaranteed parliamentary supremacy and free speech. For the first time, the crown was no longer the supreme legislative power, Parliament was.
So what's the big takeaway from those early documents? It's the rule of law. The Magna Carta established that no free man could be imprisoned without a lawful judgment. That is the direct forerunner to the modern right of habeas corpus. It simply meant the law ruled the land, not the personal whims of a single monarch.
Now, as we roll into the Enlightenment era, things get really interesting. Thinkers like John Locke sparked a massive philosophical shift. In his two treatises of government, Locke argued that natural rights exist completely independently of monarchs. He hit the nail on the head by saying rulers derive their authority only from the consent of the governed. This profound idea, that political power ultimately belongs to the people, would soon become the absolute bedrock for American independence.
Which brings us right to Part 2, the spark of revolution, taxation and tension.
You know, the American Revolution definitely didn't just happen overnight. It was the boiling point of decades of escalating tension. After the incredibly costly 7 Years' War, Britain slapped a series of taxes on the 13 colonies. Think the Sugar Act of 1764, the Stamp Act of 1765, and the Townshend Acts of 1767. The British view, the colonists needed to pay their fair share of the empire's debts. But the colonists firmly rejected this. They knew their English common law, and they knew their rights were being infringed. Their argument was simple but powerful. Taxation without representation was fundamentally illegal.
All of this friction culminated in one staggering number, 342. In 1773, protesting colonists in Boston Harbor destroyed 342 chests of British tea. It was a bold, unprecedented act of defiance, and it prompted the British Parliament to pass the Punishing Intolerable Acts the very next year. At that point, the crisis was pushed well past the point of no return.
As the conflict intensified, a total game-changer hit the printing presses. In January 1776, Thomas Paine published a little pamphlet called Common Sense. What Paine did so masterfully was take those complex, abstract Enlightenment arguments about the consent of the governed, and he translated them into a clear, passionate call to action that everyday people could rally behind. It literally spread like wildfire and built the widespread popular support needed for a true unified push for independence.
And all that popular energy crystallized later that same year with the Declaration of Independence. Drafted by Thomas Jefferson, along with a committee that included heavyweights like John Adams and Benjamin Franklin, the Declaration centered a brand new nation on a revolutionary concept, unalienable rights. It boldly declared to the world that all men are created equal and inherently possess rights that simply cannot be taken away, specifically life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Let's move to Part 3, Turning Points of War, from Lexington to Yorktown. Think about this. There were roughly 2.5 million colonists living in North America, and they were about to fight a massive political war to break free from the most powerful empire on Earth. The armed conflict officially kicked off at Lexington and Concord in April 1775. The next year, the Second Continental Congress adopts the Declaration of Independence. But the real military turning point happened in 1777 with the American victory at Saratoga. Why? Because it convinced France to enter the war as a vital military ally. And all of this culminated in the decisive British surrender at Yorktown in 1781. Of course, pulling this off required some absolutely extraordinary leadership. General George Washington managed to hold a ragged revolutionary army together through brutal, devastating winters at Valley Forge. It was there that Baron von Steuben, a Prussian officer who famously cursed at the troops in multiple languages, drilled the men into a highly disciplined fighting force. And we definitely can't forget the Marquis de Lafayette. He was just a teenager when he brought critical French troops and ships to aid the American cause. Together, these individuals literally forged a victorious army out of sheer willpower. Which brings us to the number 8,000. At Yorktown in 1781, roughly 8,000 British soldiers laid down their arms. That massive surrender effectively ended the fighting, paving the way for the Treaty of Paris in 1783, which finally, formally recognized American independence.
Now for Part 4, Framing the New Republic. From Confederation to Constitution.
Winning the war? Well, that was actually just half the battle. Now they had to figure out how to govern. Their first attempt was the Articles of Confederation in 1781, but it proved to be fundamentally weak. It gave Congress no power to tax or even regulate trade. So, in the summer of 1787, 55 delegates locked themselves in a room in Philadelphia for the Constitutional Convention. Framers like James Madison and Alexander Hamilton drafted a brand new U.S. Constitution. They resolved massive disputes between large and small states through the Great Compromise, creating a two-chamber Congress. Finally, to ensure this new, stronger government didn't end up crushing individual liberties, James Madison drafted the U.S. Bill of Rights, officially ratified in 1791. To make sure they never ended up with another king, the framers built a federal republic completely anchored by checks and balances. By deliberately separating the powers of government, they created a structural safeguard ensuring no single branch could ever gain total control. It's like a giant puzzle where every piece keeps the others in line. And to protect the citizens, the U.S. Bill of Rights added 10 amendments to that Constitution. We're talking about the First Amendment, guaranteeing freedom of speech, the press, and religion, alongside firm guarantees for due process. These were specific, hard-coded, individual protections that no government could legally take away. It set a profound new legal standard for the entire world. Finally, let's look at Part 5, a global democratic legacy, inspiring the world. The success of this whole American experiment proved that a government based on Enlightenment principles could actually work, and it sent ripple effects across the entire globe. In France, energized reformers formed the National Assembly, and by 1789 they drafted the Declaration of the Rights of Man, becoming a new republican model. Over in Haiti, Toussaint Louverture led an uprising starting in 1791 that became the only successful large-scale slave rebellion in history. And in Latin America, leaders like Simón Bolívar and José de San Martín actively cited American ideals to liberate their nations from Spanish colonial rule. If there's one driving force behind all of these global movements, it's popular sovereignty. It's the simple but earth-shattering doctrine that ultimate sovereign power doesn't rest in kings or colonial masters, it is vested entirely in the people. This became the rallying cry for self-determination that shaped independence movements for generations.
Now, I want to stress that these are not just dusty historical facts. This is the living DNA of our legal system today. The Magna Carta from 1215, it is still actively cited in modern U.S. and U.K. Supreme Court opinions regarding habeas corpus. The 1789 French Declaration is literally incorporated directly into the preamble of France's current constitution. And the U.S. Bill of Rights heavily influenced the United Nations when they drafted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights back in 1948. We've traced an incredible journey in this explainer, from a feudal meadow in England to the framing of constitutions that still govern us today. And it leaves us with a pretty powerful thought to chew on. If a 13th century charter, sealed under extreme pressure, can spark a modern global democracy, what foundations are we laying today for the liberties of tomorrow?